at the Josie Morris Ranch. She was friendly with the outlaws. Whenever they came by, she'd feed them and take care of them, let them camp out, and then they would give her money and stuff for supplies and keep her going. Oh, there's a cool looking cave back right up there. Look at that outlaw hideout cave.
Okay, wow. You have to send a picture of that.
No, I'm doing video.
Take a picture of that for me, please, Em.
You get it?
There's her cabin.
I know. Good morning, my fellow treasure hunters and explorers. Today I want to do a video about an outlaw lady named Josie Bassett. Josie Bassett Morris. And some people say, well, she wasn't an outlaw. Well, she was tried for rustling cattle twice, and she grew up living in Brown's Hole between Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah along the Green River. And so she associated many times with the outlaw bunch, the outlaw gang, and she was kind of considered an outlaw, but she led a very interesting life. And in a little bit I'm going to tell that story and show some video of her cabin and some of the places that she lived. Our Treasures of the West, some of our Treasures of the West shirts are in. This has got the skull logo, and on the back it's got our Facebook page, Facebook page, Treasures of the West, and then it's got the logo that's been on the YouTube channel for many years, or for a long time. If you would like to support the channel, there's a link in the description below that'll take you to where you can purchase one of these t-shirts or many more that I've created, or that my friend Dan Lowe has created for the channel and for our fundraisers, so that we can continue our research. One of the things we're trying to do is plan a trip to go to the Mexican archives to do some studies on the Spanish, and to look up some old family names associated with some old waybills, some old documents, some old Spanish land grants, to try to put together some of these historical information, so that we can bridge some of the gaps that are in our history. We know there were a lot of people here, but we don't know their names, we don't know who they are, and history without the information behind it is just dead space. It's interesting, but it does't mean much. So if you'd like to support that, you can donate through our PayPal account at drygulch35@yahoo.com, and that money goes towards our trip to the archives and doing our various research around. We don't make any money doing this. We entirely support this channel with our own money, with our own finances. The few dollars that we make just goes into offsetting some of the costs, so our wives and families don't get too upset at us. Anyway, Josie Bassett grew up in Brown's Hole. I don't know if any of you have been to Brown's Hole before, but Brown's Hole, you start out, the easiest way to get there, if you're not on a boat, is to go from Vernal, Utah, and take the road that goes up over the mountain and drops down into the Green River. And it goes up over the Uintas, starts on the south slope, goes up over the top, and then drops down in along where the Green River runs. And Brown's Hole was a notable outlaw hideout. It had mild temperatures in the wintertime, so it was a place that a lot of the pioneers and early settlers liked to go winter. And because it was so remote and out of the way from everything, the outlaws kind of took it up as a place to hide out. They had lots of escape routes out of there. and they established their own grapevine communication system with lookouts and everything, so that it was very difficult for the law or for the various posses and sheriff's departments to catch up to them. Josie Bassett was born the first of two girls to Herb Bassett and Mary Elizabeth Chamberlain. I guess she was born in Arkansas in January 17th of 1874, and then they came across with the pioneers. Her parents moved to a ranch spanning the borders of Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado, and just like many young girls during that time, they were taught to rope and to shoot and to ride and to herd cattle and to do not only the women's chores but the men's chores. Many times the men would be gone to town or on an extended trip hunting or prospecting or whatever they were doing, and the women had to take up the slack, and they had to know how to do all those same chores. And the stronger and more adept you were at doing those things, the better off your family and the ranch and your crops, your garden, your animals would do. The prosperity of any settlement or any ranch was based on the combined group efforts of the entire family. Josie and her sister Elizabeth, Mary Elizabeth, they both were sent to prominent boarding schools when they got a little bit older. And then they both chose to return to ranching later on when they were in their teens. So they were well educated, not only in the ways of the West, but also in the ways of education. And they could have been school teachers or done anything with their lives, but they chose to go back to ranching. Herb Bassett, her father, was known to many of the famous outlaws of the day and often did business with them, supplying them with the different things that they needed as they traveled in and out of the Browns Hole. Among those who visited the Bassett Ranch were Black Jack Ketchum, Butch Cassidy, El Zalay, Kid Curry, and Will News Carver, and Ben Kilpatrick, and there were many more. So, as you can see, that Josie and her sister had obviously had many experiences meeting these outlaws, and they treated the women for the most part with respect, and I think they got along well. As later in their lives, they both Josie and her sister had romances, affairs with many of these outlaws that went through there. Josie and Ann were good-looking women, and they both had a wild side, it's said. Ann Bassett was involved with Butch Cassidy, and Josie was involved with El Zalay, which was Cassidy's closest friend. When Cassidy was sent to prison for 18 months in 1894, Ann became involved in a relationship with Ben Kilpatrick. By the time Cassidy was released, Will News Carver had become involved with Josie, who ended their relationship when Carver became involved with the female outlaw Laura Bullion. Josie in turn became involved with Cassidy, until Cassidy again became involved with Ann. So this complicated relationship, circles of relationships, no different than what goes on today in different groups and societies and gangs. Despite the constant changes in romantic companions, both of the Bassett girls were popular, and it doesn't seem like there was any hard feelings that ever amounted to much. Josie Bassett was reportedly one of only 5 women that were allowed into the outlaw hideout called the Robbers' Roost, located in another place in Utah. the other women were her sister Ann and the Sundance Kid's girlfriend Etta Place, and Elza Lay's wife Maud Davis, and Will News Carver's girl Laura Bullion. So Josie Bassett, her sister Ann, Etta Place, Maud Davis, and Laura Bullion. Those are the 5 women that were supposedly allowed to go into the robbers' roost and into their various. They trusted them. The outlaw relationships, as well as the Bassett Ranch's supply of beef and horses to the gang, assisted the sisters in their time of need. And at one point, a powerful cattleman tried to buy out their ranch later on, and started bothering them, and the outlaws went to this powerful rancher and told him to lay off or they were going to get into some trouble, and apparently they did. After the outlaw days, when the Wild Bunch gang faded out, by 1904, most of the outlaw gang associated with the Bassett girls had died out or were captured or had moved on. Elza Lay reportedly visited Ann and Josie from the ranch shortly after his release from prison in 1906. And then he moved on to California and became a respectable businessman. Although Butch Cassidy was reportedly killed in Bolivia, Josie claimed that he visited her in 1930 and he lived in Utah until the late 1940s. So that's another witness or another person that has said that Butch Cassidy didn't die in Bolivia. Josie Bassett lived most of her life on her father's ranch and later took over his ranch for a number of years. She lived off the land. I mean, she fished, she hunted, she hiked, she explored, she mined, and she married 5 times. So she was married 5 times over the course of her lifetime, and she divorced 4 of her husbands, allegedly running one off with a frying pan. And her 5th husband died, reportedly of alcoholism, but rumors persist that Josie poisoned him. So we're going to withhold judgment on that one. But with one husband, Carl McKnight, Bassie had 2 sons, Crawford McKnight and Herbert Chick McKnight. So Crawford and Herbert McKnight. In 1913, she moved to her homestead near Vernal, Utah, and made a new ranch there. In 1924, her son Crawford helped her build a cabin there. During the Great Depression, she supplied many people with beef and garden produce, and she also made her own soap, her own clothing. She was known for her prowess of hunting. She poached a lot of deer in her life, and even a few in later days of the neighbor's cattle. She was tried twice for cattle rustling, but was never convicted. In one instance, a game warden came to her cabin, and he was joking with her that he was there to investigate a poaching. Josie didn't know he was joking with her, so she, not wanting to hide anything, she took him out to the barn where there was a fresh venison carcass hanging there, and then she carved off a couple of pieces and went back to the cabin and cooked them up, and they each had a steak. And he didn't arrest her, but he gave her a talking to about hunting deer out of season. During the Prohibition years, Josie was known to bootleg whiskey. She made her own whiskey and brandy out of the crops that she grew around her ranch. She was never arrested, but she was threatened and investigated several times. In 1936, rancher and former adversary Jim Robinson accused her of butchering his cattle and selling the meat in town. 6 other ranchers joined in the accusations, and when hides were dug up and found on her ranch, she was taken and tried for cattle rustling. In her defense, she said that these hides had been planted on her property to set her up, and she was acquitted. I guess later in her life she lost some of her land to a land grab scheme, and she did manage to hang on to enough to live on for her garden and to raise some animals. She became an eccentric and often talked about her wild bunch days with the neighbors as she got older. I guess like many older folks do, they like to talk about their past and empty out the barn, so to speak, of the cobwebs. And in December 1963, she fell down when a horse bumped into her, and she broke her hip. And she ended up dying a few months later at the age of 90. She was the last remaining associate of the Wild Bunch gang, as well as the last direct source of information about its members, their personalities and traits. So she's the last one that really knew all the Wild Bunch. She lived through that era, and she lived into the modern era. So anyway, she's a very interesting person, and my family and I, we took a little mini vacation down to Dinosaur National Monument. My daughters had never been to the monument before, and we went through the monument, Dinosaur Monument, and then we drove out past the Green River, over the bridge, and then out to the Josie Morris cabin, and had a picnic there in the Cottonwood Grove, and it was a lot of fun. It was a beautiful day. The weather was great, and Josie Bassett's cabin is one of the most beautiful little cabin locations you'll ever find in the West.
Well, here we are at the Green River. The Brown River. It's running, got some runoff in it from recent rains. Tells about all the fish in the creek. Bonytail, Colorado pike minnow, humpback chub, razor sucker, bluehead sucker, flannel mouth sucker, round-tailed chub, Colorado River cutthroat, mottled sculpin, mountain sucker, speckled dace, mountain whitefish or burbot, adult northern pike, smallmouth bass, walleye, rainbow trout, channel catfish, common carp, and a brown trout. To catch a non-invasive or an invasive species, do not return to the river.
Yep. So I was just looking at.
Rare native fish. Lots of outlaws used to hang out around here. This is not too far from Brown's Park. This is the Green River. Lots of Native American petroglyphs.
Okay, here we are at the Josie Morris Ranch. She was friendly with the outlaws. Whenever they came by, she'd feed them and take care of them, let them camp out, and then they would give her money and stuff for supplies and keep her going. Oh, there's a cool looking cave back right up there. Look at that outlaw hideout cave.
Oh, cool cave. Wow. You have to send me a picture of that.
No, I'm doing video.
Could you take a picture of that for me, please, Abby? Okay, let's just
You get it?
I know.
We already got one here. He likes it.
Like she got a new roof put on by Butch Cassidy. Door slow. Like that's been rebuilt with more modern brick. Keep the cabin standing. Old homesteads are scattered throughout Dinosaur National Monument, such as Memorial to Hope and Hard Work. This cabin and the nearby structures are part of the homestead established by Josie Bassett Morris in the early 1900s. Nearing 40 years of age, divorced and with her children grown, Josie wanted a home of her own. She chose this spot for its plentiful water, good pasture, and natural resources to grow fruits and vegetables and raise cattle. She braided soft rugs, softened the cabin floors, handmade quilts warmed the beds, and Josie's favorite picture hung on wall-papered walls. In the summer, beds of cosmos, marigolds, and poppies ringed the cabin. Family and friends from Vernal often visited. There was always lots of work and never much money, but life at Cub Creek suited Josie's independent spirit. She lived at the cabin until shortly before her death in 1964 at age 90. Pretty cool. Howdy.